These are 10 action films from the 1990s that almost ended careers, on their way to becoming the reason anyone over 40 still remembers that decade as the last golden age of the action movie. The studios handed their biggest budgets to their loudest talent for one strange stretch, and the result was a run of films that today would never survive a single round of studio notes. The claim is straightforward. Modern action cinema has more money, sharper pixels, and higher resolution than anything on this list, and yet the films about to be discussed did things no modern blockbuster will even attempt. To understand why, you have to look at the films themselves. The decade opens with Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall, released by TriStar Pictures on June 1, 1990, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger alongside Rachel Ticotin, Sharon Stone, and Michael Ironside. Carolco Pictures financed it, and at the time of its release, it ranked among the most expensive productions Hollywood had ever greenlit. The source material traces back to a 1966 Philip K. Dick short story titled, "We Can Remember It For You Wholesale." None of that is what makes it notable. What marks Total Recall is its willingness to put things on screen that no other major studio release would touch. Schwarzenegger pulls a large tracking device out of his own nose in one sequence. A woman with 3 breasts appears in another, and a Johnny Cab taxi driver, built as a real animatronic puppet, carries him across Mars in a third. A small stature prostitute opens fire in a Martian bar. The picture takes home a Special Achievement Oscar for visual effects, and the tone for the next 10 years arrives in the space of a single summer release. Most of the films that followed it did not have its budget. Almost all of them shared its appetite. On July 12, 1991, 20th Century Fox released a film whose central premise sounded like a dare. Kathryn Bigelow directed Point Break, and the hook was this: a crew of bank robbers who were also surfers, who wore rubber masks of Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, and Lyndon B. Johnson while they worked, and who called themselves the ex-presidents. Keanu Reeves played the undercover FBI agent Johnny Utah, Patrick Swayze played their leader Bodie, and Gary Busey played Utah's partner. Swayze reportedly insisted on performing real skydives for the film's aerial sequences, which means the man on screen is often the man actually falling. The foot chase through suburban Los Angeles is still cited by working directors as one of the best ever captured on film, and Busey shouts a line about a meatball sandwich that older viewers can still quote from memory. Here's the thing about Bigelow. 2 decades later, she would become the first woman to win the Academy Award for Best Director, taking it home for The Hurt Locker, and in 1991, she was the director of a film about surfers in Reagan masks who rob banks, which she filmed with a completely straight face. The third film on this list never came near Hollywood. John Woo directed Hard Boiled in Hong Kong in 1992, and it would prove to be his last Hong Kong film before he left for the United States. Chow Yun-fat played a jazz clarinet-playing cop named Inspector Tequila Yuen. Tony Leung Chu-wai played an undercover officer, and the climax of the picture takes place in a hospital. That hospital finale contains a long, unbroken tracking shot that follows the 2 leads from one floor of the building to another in a single continuous take, while they shoot their way past dozens of gunmen. At one point during that sequence, Tequila carries a baby out of a burning ward. Philip Kwok choreographed the action like a dance, and the message the film sent to Hollywood producers landed hard and fast. Here was a filmmaker working in Hong Kong, staging action at a level the American studio system had simply stopped attempting. Within 18 months, John Woo was making American films. Within 5 years, he would direct 2 of the entries still to come on this list. And that's when the system overreached. Last Action Hero, released by Columbia Pictures on June 18, 1993, was directed by John McTiernan, the filmmaker behind Die Hard and Predator, and it starred Arnold Schwarzenegger in a story about a young boy who is given a magic movie ticket that lets him step inside the world of a fictional action franchise featuring a character called Jack Slater. Shane Black and David Arnott share the script credit. The film leaned into its premise with unusual aggression. An animated cat detective walks through live action scenes. A version of Shakespeare's Hamlet gets rewritten as a Schwarzenegger action sequence. Sharon Stone appears in cameo as her character from Basic Instinct. Robert Patrick appears as the T-1000 from Terminator 2, and the movie stacks celebrity after celebrity on top of its own structure. 1 week before the release of Last Action Hero, on June 11, 1993, Jurassic Park opened in American cinemas. The result was a box office collision the industry still tells as a cautionary tale, and for years afterward, the film was treated as proof of what happens when a studio gives one of its biggest stars too much freedom. The picture has since been reappraised, and the damage at the time was real, and it changed how studios thought about meta-comedy in action films for more than a decade. 4 months later, on October 8, 1993, Warner Brothers released something stranger. Marco Brambilla directed Demolition Man, with Joel Silver producing, and the cast lined up 3 actors who would each define a different corner of 1990s cinema. Sylvester Stallone played a 1996 LAPD officer named John Spartan. Wesley Snipes played the criminal Simon Phoenix. Sandra Bullock played a future police officer named Lenina Huxley. Both Spartan and Phoenix get cryogenically frozen in 1996 and thawed out in 2032 in a sanitized California megacity called San Angeles. In that future, profanity is illegal, and automatic machines issue fines for cursing. Every restaurant is a Taco Bell because, as the film explains on camera, Taco Bell was the only chain that survived something called the franchise wars. Bathrooms operate on a mysterious technology called the 3 seashells, and the film refuses to explain how they work. Here's where it gets strange. In international markets, every Taco Bell reference in the picture was stripped out and replaced with Pizza Hut. Every logo changed, every line of dialogue redubbed, and international audiences saw the exact same film with the satirical centerpiece swapped for a completely different fast food chain. It is possibly the only major Hollywood release of the decade to have its central joke silently rewritten for half the world. Almost nobody noticed. By 1994, the template had started to shift. Speed arrived on June 10 that year, released by 20th Century Fox, and it was the feature directing debut of Jan de Bont, who had spent years as one of the busiest cinematographers in Hollywood. Graham Yost wrote the screenplay. Keanu Reeves starred as LAPD officer Jack Traven. Sandra Bullock played bus passenger Annie Porter. Dennis Hopper appeared as the bomber Howard Payne, and Jeff Daniels rounded out the cast as Traven's partner Harry Temple. The hook was a single sentence. A city bus has been rigged with a bomb that will detonate if the vehicle drops below 50 miles per hour. That sentence sold the film. 2 Academy Awards followed, for Best Sound and Best Sound Effects Editing, and the film included a now famous sequence in which the bus jumped a gap in an unfinished elevated freeway. Speed proved that the decade's action films did not have to come from Hong Kong, and did not need a $200 million budget, and did not require a veteran director. They needed one impossible premise, committed to without hedging. Not every film that came after would learn that lesson. In the summer of 1996, Michael Bay directed his second feature. Hollywood Pictures released The Rock on June 7, 1996, and the cast carried it. Sean Connery played a former SAS captain named John Mason. Nicolas Cage played an FBI chemical weapons specialist named Stanley Goodspeed. Ed Harris played the rogue United States Marine General Francis X. Hummel. The story runs through Alcatraz Island, which Hummel seizes after taking a tour group hostage and threatening a chemical weapons attack on San Francisco. And Connery's character turns out to be the only living man who knows how to break back in, because he once escaped. Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer produced the film together. Simpson died in January 1996, before the film was released, and the picture carries a dedication to him. The San Francisco set piece features a car chase involving a Humvee, a yellow Ferrari, and a cable car, and it remains, to this day, the only Michael Bay film accepted into the Criterion Collection. That last fact should tell you something about how the decade treated action cinema. A film containing a cable car crash and a chemical weapons standoff was judged by a curatorial body that includes Kurosawa and Bergman, worth preserving. Jerry Bruckheimer's next production raised the ceiling and then set it on fire. Con Air, directed by Simon West in his feature debut, hit theaters through Touchstone Pictures on June 6, 1997, and the cast list alone told you what kind of film it was going to be. Nicolas Cage played a former Army Ranger named Cameron Poe, imprisoned for killing a man in a bar fight while defending his wife, and paroled straight onto a prisoner transport flight. John Malkovich played the criminal mastermind Cyrus the Virus Grissom. John Cusack appeared as a U.S. Marshal on the ground, and Steve Buscemi played a serial killer named Garland Green. Ving Rhames, Danny Trejo, Dave Chappelle, Colm Meaney, and MC Gainey filled out one of the deepest character actor benches of any action film in the decade. And the film went for 2 Academy Awards. The first nomination went to the song How Do I Live, written by Diane Warren and performed by Trisha Yearwood. The second nomination went to Best Sound. Here's the detail most viewers still do not know. The climax of the film involved crashing the prisoner transport plane on the Las Vegas Strip, and the production shot that sequence at the actual site of the Sands Hotel, which had been demolished in real life the year before. The production used the empty lot. Cage wore a long-haired wig for every scene in the movie. His character at one point asked a guard to please put the bunny back in the box, and the line would outlive most of the rest of his performance online. All of that happened in the same year Cage starred in The Rock, and the same year he appeared in the next film on this list. 21 days after Con Air, on June 27, 1997, John Woo released his third American film. Face Off starred John Travolta as FBI agent Sean Archer and Nicolas Cage as the terrorist Castor Troy, from a screenplay by Mike Werb and Michael Colleary that had originally been written as a science fiction film set in a distant future, before the writers reworked it into a contemporary action picture. The premise lands in a single paragraph. Archer undergoes an experimental face transplant procedure to take on the face of the comatose Troy so he can infiltrate a terrorist plot. And while Archer is undercover, Troy wakes up and takes Archer's face in return. Travolta and Cage were each then required to play 2 people at once, the character they had been cast as, plus the other actor's character wearing their face. Both men studied each other's mannerisms in order to imitate them, which meant that for most of the running time, John Travolta is playing Nicolas Cage playing John Travolta, and vice versa. The film earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Sound Effects Editing, and it remains one of the most openly ridiculous premises ever greenlit by a major Hollywood studio with 2 of its biggest stars attached. Which brings us to the last one. Columbia Pictures released Double Team on April 4, 1997, directed by Tsui Hark, the Hong Kong master who, like John Woo before him, arrived in Hollywood at the peak of a wave. Jean-Claude Van Damme starred as a counter-terrorism operative named Jack Quinn. Mickey Rourke played the villain Stavros, and in his first leading film role, the Chicago Bulls forward Dennis Rodman appeared as an eccentric weapons dealer named Yaz. Half the plot takes place on a secret island facility called The Colony, described in the film as a think tank for intelligence operatives who are too valuable to kill. And the other half builds toward what is, by any reasonable measure, one of the strangest climaxes in the history of the 1990s action film. The climax takes place in the Roman Colosseum. In that Colosseum, there is a Bengal tiger. There are landmines set into the arena floor, and there is, in the closing moments of the fight, a baby in a basket rigged with explosives. The picture swept several Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst New Star for Rodman. A major studio actually paid for it, marketed it, and released it into theaters. 10 films, 1 decade, and a pattern that is now impossible to miss. Total Recall opened the 1990s on the surface of Mars. Point Break put bank robbers in Reagan masks on a beach in Los Angeles. Hard Boiled put John Woo in a Hong Kong hospital for one of the longest single takes in action history. Last Action Hero put Schwarzenegger inside his own movie. Demolition Man put Stallone in a future where everything was Taco Bell or Pizza Hut, depending on where you lived. Speed put Keanu Reeves on a bus that could not slow down. The Rock put Sean Connery back on Alcatraz. Con Air crashed a plane at the empty site of a hotel that had been standing 12 months earlier. Face Off asked 2 of the biggest stars in the world to swap faces, and Double Team put Jean-Claude Van Damme in the Roman Colosseum with Dennis Rodman and a tiger. None of these films were accidents. They were the output of a system that still paid for practical stunts, that trusted foreign directors with American budgets, that handed Nicolas Cage 3 consecutive leading man paychecks in 13 months, and that believed audiences would show up for an idea as long as it was committed to with a completely straight face. That system is gone. The films it produced are still here. The reason anyone remembers them 30 years later is not that they were larger than modern action films. It is that they were stranger, more specific, and more willing to look ridiculous in the service of something the audience had never been shown before. That is what made them unhinged, and that is what keeps them, still, too good to ignore.